Gracious God, on this wonderful Paschal feast, help us to understand how it is that Jesus goes ahead of us, and so we can be emboldened to follow and lead in this life. Amen.
Amen.
So it's Easter, but it looks nice and all dressed up and all that. It's Easter, that season when we know that light unmistakably conquers the darkness. Don't we know that?
Yes.
And yet we know that whatever challenges we face in life, coming through these doors, will not magically disappear because it's Easter Sunday. It won't. So it's Easter, but what happens when you're having a hard time seeing the light? I know many people this morning are having a hard time seeing the light. People in this city, in other places around the country and around the world, having a hard time seeing the light. Let me begin with a couple of stories. I hope you will agree with me that they talk about light and promise and hope. A man in his middle years was on a Caribbean cruise on the first day of the cruise, he was out on the deck and he noticed an attractive woman about his age who smiled at him as she passed by in a friendly way. And that night they managed to be seated together at the same table for dinner. And as the conversation developed, he commented to her that he had seen her on the deck and how he appreciated the fact that she smiled at him. Well, she said, well, the reason I smiled was that when I saw you, I was immediately struck by your strong resemblance to my third husband. At this, he perked up and said, well, how many times have you been married? She looked down at her plate demurely and then looked at him slyly and said, twice. A woman took her 7-year-old niece to a wedding. As the girl looked around the way the bride and groom were dressed, she asked her aunt, why is the woman dressed in white? Her aunt thought for a while, then said something like, well, this is a happy day for both of them, filled with promise of wonderful days ahead for the man and woman. White is a color that expresses that. White expresses light, not darkness. The little girl thought for a while, and she tugged at her arm with a quizzical smile, and she asked her, so why is the man dressed in black? And one more little vignette. An examination was being held in little Billy's class at school, and the question was asked, upon what do hibernating animals subsist during the long winter months? Billy thought for a while, then he wrote, all winter long, hibernating animals subsist on the hope of the coming spring. So these stories highlight for us on this Easter morning those themes of promise and light in the midst of darkness, of hope and springtime. We know that life unfolds season by season. We know that there are seasons of joy and seasons of sadness. We know that there are seasons of pain and seasons of happiness. Who among us has not had these experiences in life? And sometimes the darkness in our lives can threaten to engulf us if we let it, because it can be so daunting. And yet, through it all, if you are sitting here, or as you're sitting here today, I know that you are a survivor. More than a survivor. We are more than survivors. We can even be conquerors, and even more than conquerors. Today we witness how Jesus, though he suffered agonizing pain and sadness, was a survivor. No, he was more than a survivor. Jesus was a conqueror. No, he was more than a conqueror. My mother passed away 4 years ago at the age of 96, and I can testify about how she made it through the fires of life. Through the fire of being orphaned, and being raised by her godmother, through the fires of having her 5 children taken away from her through court order, custody being given to my dad, through the experiences on that year that her children were taken away from her and custody given to my dad, that she brought on that first Christmas morning, she brought gifts for her 5 children. And she was turned away at the door by my stepmother. She couldn't even come in and give gifts. I spent lots of years being very angry at my dad about that and many things. And, you know, a year ago this January, he died at 99 years old. And by then we had come to some reconciliation. But without a doubt, my mom was more than a survivor of the ravages that threatened to do her in. And she was never really done in. She suffered a lot, but she was never really done in by it. I know that I'm a survivor because of the inspiration that she gave me. So that was part of her story, which I don't have to go into details. By no means was it an easy time, yet I know that she was more than a survivor. She was a conqueror. She was more than a conqueror. 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I thought my life was about to end at age 55. I remember the day I went to the oncologist for the results after having waited for about 10 days and not knowing what was going to happen. It was a bright summer day. I remember that. It was June, middle of June. I just, as I said, turned 55, and he pulled the shades. He wanted to show me, the room became dark, and wanted to show me the results on the screen. And he started out like this. He said, "Oh, Mr. Brown," he said, "cancer," just like that. It sounded like a death sentence. That was the summer of 1999, as I said, almost 20 years ago. And here I am, a cancer survivor, more than a survivor. On that first resurrection day, the 2 Marys and Salome went out into the darkness of that early pre-dawn morning with their pants. Sad as they were, early in the morning they got up. They were bringing spices to anoint the body, the dead body of the one they loved, Jesus. And what, to their astonishment, did they find? In the throes of their deep despair, they found a messenger of hope. What they found and heard was a message and a promise. What they found and heard was an affirmation of hope that would stand the test of time and the ravages of all they had to face in a cruel world. They survived. They triumphed. They were more than survivors. They were more than conquerors. The message that they heard that day was, "Go and tell Peter and the others that he goes ahead of you into Galilee. There you will find him." this Jesus the Christ, the very model of a more than a survivor, more than a conqueror. He was. My mother's life was a testament of one who never stopped believing in that message of hope amidst darkness and despair. And when I had been in the very throes and dungeons of despair, and there have been times in my life when I have heard that voice and I have listened. He goes before you. Jesus goes ahead of you. Let that sink in. Let that be part of your own testimony, of your own experiences of surviving whatever you have survived in your own life, of being more than a survivor, of being a conqueror of those things, and more than a conqueror. Having conquered all manner of things, even death on a cross. He has gone, and even now he goes ahead of us. My friends, you know, like I do, that life's challenges are real. You have faced them. Colbert King said in his column in the Washington Post yesterday, 50 years ago, National Cathedral churchgoers wept at a service memorializing Dr. King. 50 years later, weeping still has no end for people in this city, he said, and many cities. Weeping has no end. For people without decent, affordable housing, or schools that work, or jobs that put food on the table, the wealth gap continues, the racial gulf, the gun culture, and society's unwanted still are with us 50 years later. Yes, these conditions exist, and they will be there when you leave this church today. The same Congress will be up on Capitol Hill, and just like Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had to face the conditions of dark days ahead. They triumphed, yes, but they had to face dark days. We, like those women, when we walk out of here, having the same kinds of issues that we faced when we walked in, can be survivors, have been survivors, can be conquerors, can be more than conquerors, because Jesus goes ahead of us. Hear this and be emboldened to continue to live with the joy and the hope of Easter, because he has gone before us and he continues to go before us. Hallelujah! Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.